All right. So of course, here we are again, doing our new project, Project 4. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing an office chair. Now, as we often do when we start a new project, is we have to create a whole new project, right? So this will be the fourth time doing it. We'll still do it two more times. So of course we go File, right? And we go to Project Window, right? File, Project Window. And then, of course, that brings us up to here. And you can kind of see there's the kind of naming convention for the project there. Remember, it's important for you guys to follow naming conventions, right? I don't sweat it too much, but it's the kind of thing that when you work with the studio, you're going to want to follow naming conventions. And later teachers are really going to want you to do that. So some of these things I'm doing, I'm just trying to get you guys in the habit of doing so that other teachers won't yell at you, right? Now remember, a project really is just a folder that has a bunch of other folders inside of it, right? And what's cool is it's just a way to organize stuff, right? Like you can put all of your scenes in the scenes folder. You'll notice there's an autosave folder, so if you've enabled autosave, all your autosaves will be in there if you've set a project. And even things like images and source images are great for where your textures and your reference images can go, right? And remember, when you have a project created and you set the project, that project, the scene that you open, knows where to look for other scenes if you've done referencing, right? Or look for textures or source images right in these folders. So projects are fairly useful. So in this case, of course, I'm going to say new scene. And I'm not going to name it quite yet because I'm going to go browse really quick. So in this case, you can just name it again if you want to. But we do want to kind of tell it to go to the right place. So of course, new makes a new project. You can give it a name. Location is where it's going to save at. So of course, we can click on that folder. And you can see it's automatically going to Project 3. In this case, I'm actually just going to copy that naming convention there for the moment. So sometimes it could just be great to just kind of go in, copy it. But I'm going to go back out one because we want it to, for my case, just go to desktop. Probably for you guys, desktop as well. But yeah, so there we go. And we'll select, and that way it's definitely on desktop. And I can easily just kind of paste, right? I copied that in there and pasted it. But this time it's going to be Project 4. So I was really just kind of using the already existing naming convention we had. DAA, Intro to 3D Modeling, 240, and then of course underscore. It's always important to use underscores for our naming conventions. You'll see that's probably the one standard thing in a naming convention is the underscore. Everything else is usually somewhat descriptive, but it will be different depending on who your project managers or your project leads are. So we're using this naming conventions because it's descriptive for our class, but it will be different for different stuff. But it's more that you're following and using a naming convention than what the specific naming convention is. And of course, underscore summer 20 because that's the semester we're in. Underscore your names, in my case, my name, right? And then underscore the project it is. So when you hit new, you can give it a name. This should be good for Project 4. And of course, you can browse for where you want to save it at. And then we'll hit accept. And a new project has been created, right? So now, of course, we go to File, Set Project, right? Because the project's been created, but we need to tell Maya to use this as the project, right? That way when we load scenes in or we go to File, Open Scene, it'll take us right to Project 4. And any images that are loaded, in this case reference images, but when we get to Project 5, which will be our next project, textures, the scene will automatically know where to look for those and load them in, even if you've moved this project to a different computer, as long as that project's set. So we go File, Set Project, and there's Project 4. And remember, you don't open it, you just select it, and then we hit Set, and there we go. That's the active project. Now in this case, remember I want to find an office chair. In this case, you can see I've already got one that I'm going to use. Now, it should be an office chair with spokes, right? This kind of office chair right here, no, don't use that, right? We don't want to do those kinds of legs. We want to do this kind of office chair. I want to show you guys how to make the spokes. Believe it or not, we've actually kind of already done it, right? The knob for our lamp was actually this. It's just going to be on its side. But we do want to kind of build this, right? That's going to allow me to talk to you guys a little bit more about how to reorient your manipulators. We've kind of already dabbled with it here and there. But in this case, we're going to need to use it a little bit more on this one. Or at least it'll be a good option for us to do stuff. Ideally, I like you guys to have armrests like this if you can find it. So that way you're building it just like mine. If you do have armrests like this, that really would just be kind of a cube for the top here. Then put a few edge loops in, and you could easily kind of put a few this way, put a few that way, and then you have some faces here that you can just extrude, rotate, extrude. right? Ideally, though, if you could find one that's got kind of like a full piece like this, that's great. Not mandatory. Ideally, like you to get that. The biggest thing, though, you really need, though, is wheels and spokes that come out like this. Ideally, in one molded piece of plastic would be great. And then, of course, some cushions. So it should be an armchair, that way, or an office chair. That way we can kind of build it and kind of build all the core kind of parts here. So I'm going to save that, right? So we'll save image as. And I'm just going to go right to my project 4, which should be that one because it was created today. So I'm just going to open that up. And I'm going to go to source images, right? And what I can do is call this chair. There we go. All right. And that should be able to save that as our office chair. I'm going to leave this open for a minute, just to go back to Maya here. So that way we can create our reference image, right? So we've done this before, right? Create, it's now the 4th time I'm doing this with you guys, right? But it's great practice. Create free image plane, right? And there's our image plane, right? It'll load it in as this kind of green square with a green X. And it's green, meaning it's selected, right? Remember, if you click off, it'll become kind of like purple magenta. That means it's not selected. You just click on the edge, right? You notice if you just kind of click here, it won't do it. So usually you kind of click on the actual kind of shape itself, either the X or that. So basically kind of the wireframe of it. So that's selected. And of course, remember over on the right side here, we have channel box layer editor, right? Remember, this is where your history would be at. You can type in numerical values for transforming the shape at the object level here. This is our layer editor. We'll see this a lot more when we get to Project 6. Modeling toolkit, of course, is there. And then, of course, attribute editor, right? And remember, they're all right here. And even Control A will toggle you between your channel box layer editor and your attribute editor. Control A, right? But we want attribute editor. But remember, these buttons appear as well. In an attribute editor, really we only have 2 of these tabs, because if you're ever an attribute editor and you have history, you'll see a lot more tabs in here. And that's kind of your way to see history that way. So you can actually still see your history here. But attribute editor really kind of shows you the properties for your object, right? Channel box layer editor doesn't really show you the properties for your object. Only shows you history, only shows you the transforms. Attribute editor will actually show you the properties for the object. So if you ever need to get in and actually adjust certain attributes for the object in general, attribute editor is a better option. In fact, when we start to do stuff with materials, we'll use attribute editor even more. In this case, usually when you click on it from an image plane, you've already got the defaults here, right? Image plane shape 1. It usually goes right to this. You should basically see right here, color gain, color offset, and that little folder image name. Because remember, whenever you see the folder in Maya, it basically means you could browse outside of Maya to load something in. So I can click on that. And there's the chair JPEG, right? Because we saved it right into source images. Hit open. And there we go. It's all loaded in now. Now in this case, remember, we do have to consider size, right? So I'm going to go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, right? Remember, there's lots of other things in here. Outliners there. You turn user interface elements off and on. We'll talk about a few other editors here when we get to later projects. But Settings and Preferences. You can actually, remember, you can assign your own hotkeys here. So if I go to Hotkey Editor, right? Give it a minute to come up. I'm just trying to remind you guys of some of these things. You should not be taking that long to come up. You can actually go in here and set your own shortcuts, right? So if I go to Editors, I can pick these different editors. If I go to Other Items or Menu Items, right, it'll show you menus like Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, right? So if I go to Edit Mesh, there's Bevel, it's already Control B, Bridge if you want to give it something, okay, Extrude. So any one of these you can just kind of click on, right? And then you can type in whatever you want the quick key to be. Then you can save it. So keep in mind, and you can always kind of reset if you need to, right? You can go up here and kind of import or export. But just keep in mind that you can actually assign your own quick keys, right? Maya gives you some good default ones, but you can assign your own. Just like you can adjust color settings for the environment. And you can even, if you wanted to, make your own marking menus, right? Like right-clicking, right? See how it kind of gives you your regions on your pie? Which mouse buttons will do that stuff. So remember, you can actually have controls over those things if you want to. But in this case, we're just going to go Preferences. There we go. And of course, a lot of these things we talked about before. You can turn off the highlight what's new in the release, so it doesn't highlight the green stuff. You can enable or disable mouse scroll wheel. User interface elements is kind of turning stuff off and on. Display can kind of turn things off and on. Manipulators, if you want to just adjust your manipulator size, or hide manipulator when you click on something, right? You can even use repositioning of your manipulator with the middle mouse button instead of using it as the last selected axis. I kind of like having it on last selected axis. That's kind of why it's off by default. You know, they give you some preferences there. Polygon display types there. Down here, remember files, projects, that's where your autosave's at. You can enable that. And it'll go right to project by default, right, whatever the set project is. Selection options, which usually all the ones that are on by default are fine. Undos, right, so if you ever want to change your undo amount. And of course settings, and that's really what we wanted to look at. Because we wanted to change the working units from centimeters to meters, right? You can work in centimeters, it's just that you'd have to make your grid a lot bigger to get a properly sized object. A lot of objects we make are dozens and dozens of centimeters in size, right? Because, you know, many centimeters in a foot or a meter. So I like using meters for our classes because the grid doesn't have to get so dense. But whatever your studio uses, meter, centimeter, remember you can change that. So I'm going to hit save. There we go. And now you'll see that this chair is actually not that big, right? Because each of these grid units is now a meter, and a meter is 3 feet, right? And when you think about a chair is a bigger object, right? Our clock radio, not that big. Our lamp, not that big. Our bed, our desk, our end table, our chair, a little bit larger in size, right? The lamp and the clock radio would actually go on top of these things. So this chair should easily be, you know, probably, when you think about it, probably like 4 foot, 3.5, 4 foot tall, right? So this chair image plane should be larger. It should be probably a little bit bigger than a grid unit, right? If you wanted to stay in centimeters, you'd probably go to display, right? Because remember, you can turn grid off and on, right? So you can turn grid off and on. But remember, you can also go to the options box for grid in the display menu. And you can actually tell it to have a lot more units, right? If you turn this up a lot more, you'll see a lot more grid units, right? Just to show this off, right? If I was to set this to say like 30 instead of 12, and I was to apply, so there's a lot more grid units. So if you wanted to work in centimeters and see a lot more grid units, you can, right? We're just trying to keep it simpler and just change it to meters. And it's great, it gives us practice, changing those things, knowing that we can change the units that we're using. But remember, we're trying to build this stuff to scale, right? So that way when you hand it off to somebody else, it's not really small. But you have grid options, right? That can be useful for doing stuff. In this case, remember F for frame selection, Alt left for rotate camera, Alt middle for move camera, and Alt right for zoom camera. Remember that middle mouse button is the scroll wheel, right? And of course R for scale. Remember they all right here though. Q for selection, W for move, E for rotate, R for scale, right? I know I've mentioned this a lot of times. A lot of you guys are pretty comfortable with that, but like it's one of the things that if we were doing this in class, I'd be repeating these a lot also. So R for scale. And like I said, I want to make this about probably about a third bigger than a grid unit. So remember, the handles control the different axes. In this case, the very center one, which if it's not selected is light blue, right? Yellow is the color of the currently active axis. That center one, that's light blue, is actually all 3 at the same time. Just like these guys are actually 2 at a time, right? So this one 1, this one 2, that one kind of all 3. So I'll just left click drag to kind of get this a little bit bigger than about a grid unit. And keep in mind that, kind of the actual chair itself, the image itself can be a bit bigger than that, because in this case there's a lot of dead space there. So that should probably work pretty well for a chair, I think. At least it'll get us close enough in terms of scale. I always hit W for my move tool, right? Because if this is kind of on the center, we want to build the objects from the center, right? And so it's a lot easier to not have this on the center so that it's still there as our visual reference, but we can still model on the 0 of the world. Remember, that's the origin, 0, 0, 0. So in this case, though, we don't want to move it forward because that'll be in front of the object if we went to one of our other views, right? Remember, tapping spacebar kind of minimizes that view. And you can see your other 4 views, right? And I was just hitting A because A is fit all. F is fit selection, right? And you can see that this is our front view, our side view, our top view. So just keep that in mind. Remember, if you haven't accidentally ever set your perspective to top or side, it's probably because you held down spacebar too long, right? So if you tap it, it just minimizes, maximizes. If you hold it down, it brings up all of your menus, right? And if you click on the center one, Maya, particularly if you hold down left mouse button, you see how you can actually change your camera view. So you might have accidentally hit top or something like that. But you can always hold down spacebar, left click and hold down on Maya and switch back to whatever viewport you want. But in this case, if I move the blue arrow forward, you see how it's kind of actually in front. And I want it in behind. That way it's actually properly behind our front view. So that when we make our chair on the 0, this will be behind it properly. So just kind of remember those little tricks, right? I put my cursor over this view, tap spacebar, it maximizes that. Remember, you can always go to those orthographic views if you need them. Just kind of quick reminders of that stuff in these videos. We're really only going to make the cushions and the armrests today. We'll kind of save the spokes in the lower part of the chair for Thursday in our next class session. And then we'll do the wheels, because our fan is the other model in this project, and that takes about a day, right? It's a day lecture. So we're just going to take our time on this chair and kind of do it over 3 days, right? Because there's nothing too nuts about it, and it's basically all stuff we've done before, but there's many parts to it, right? And a little bit more dynamic shaping than, say, a desk or an end table. Not quite as tricky as the clock, but, so we'll take 3 days on it. All right, so there it is. It's in the kind of position we want it in. And what we want to do is we want to start to build our object. Now remember, sometimes you're not always going to have the best reference picture, right? This is at a bit of an angle. Oftentimes you'll find that if you look this up and it's on like Staples or OfficeDepot.com, you'll actually get views from a couple different angles. Remember, you can create as many reference images as you want. You don't have to just use one. You can use 2 or 3 if you wanted from different angles. So if you really want to have the different views from like a side and a front, go for it, right? Create multiple free image planes. For me, you don't always find as many pictures, and so one's fine. But remember, you're not going to try to build it at an angle, right? Don't build stuff at an angle. It's going to screw you up, right? Build it kind of straight along the axes. There's a little bit of interpretation, right? There's going to be a little bit of foreshortening. This is a bit of an angle. We want you to make it look like the picture, but sometimes you have to interpret because you don't get as great a reference image as you want. So in this case, we're going to start with the cushions. And when we look at the cushions, they're strongly based on a cube shape, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to create polygon primitives cube, right? Create polygon primitives cube. There we go. And of course, we'll probably start the bottom one here. It's a little large, so we'll hit R for scale. And remember, it's already in object mode. The moment you created it, it's in object mode. And remember, we were creating polygon primitives, not NURBS primitives. Polygon primitives, right? We're not using NURBS because NURBS are hard to work with, right? We use splines sometimes to generate polygon meshes, but polygons are just a lot easier and faster to work with for the vast majority of modeling. So remember, we're using polygon primitives, and in this case, since these are boxy shapes, a cube, right? Polygon primitive cube. It's by default in object mode, green wireframe. Remember, if you put your cursor over the object and you hold down right mouse button, it brings up this marquee menu. So you can go to vertex, edge, face, or object level, right? In this case, I want to make this smaller, so we'll just R for scale, right? They're all right here too. Left click drag on that center one. Although since that's the currently selected one, if I just hold down middle mouse button, it'll use whatever the last activated handle was, right? So if I do that one, middle mouse button will do that, right? So it's kind of cool that it does that. There we go. All right, so hold on, I'm going to sneeze. Maybe not. All right. Sorry, I almost sneezed. So remember, our cushion's going to be pretty thin comparatively. It's going to only be a couple feet wide. So that should work pretty well for there. And we want to make sure there's some good length for kind of the middle of the body. And that looks like it's about the proper size. I can hit W for move, and I can move it down a little bit. But you notice how I'm not moving it on the blue, and I'm not moving it on the Z, right? We're only moving it on the green because I really want to keep, particularly in this case, the Z, because I'm going to build it kind of this direction, right? I really want to keep my Z zeroed out, right? Because we want that symmetry to keep working. All right. Now in this case, I do need an edge loop down the center, right? Because that really helps us not only to be able to delete half and mirror it later on, but it helps our symmetry to work, right? So remember, of course, I can go to multi-cut. Right here, good old multi-cut tool. There we go. And of course, by default, it's set to allow us to kind of draw an edge manually, and we'll do that a little bit on our ceiling fan actually next week. And of course, you can slice, right? We kind of did that for the trim, right? If you left click drag, it'll slice. But in this case, if we hold down Control, right, you'll notice when we hold down Control and we kind of put our cursor over an edge, right, it's going to put in an edge loop perpendicular to that. So we want to put an edge loop this way. Now I do want it exactly in the middle. So remember, when you turn multi-cut on, it has options, right? Things like edge flow. We saw that briefly in our lamp. That'll actually keep the shape curved, right? Which in this case, you probably won't actually want, right? Some of you guys run into it still on, and it was making it all poofed out, and you're like, oh, I don't want that. So usually by default, it's good to have it off, but it can be useful, it can be cool sometimes. The thing I really wanted to change, though, was the snap percentage size, which in this case, I've already got set up the way I wanted to. It's at 50, right? That's 50%. That means the middle. So when I hold down Control and then Shift, right, Control-Shift, you'll notice that it snaps right to the middle. And that's going to allow us to put an edge loop right in the center. So there we go. Edge loop right in the center. All right. So now we've got our edge loop in the center. I'm going to turn multi-cut off for the moment. Now, you'll notice that there's a decent amount of curved stuff on this chair. All right. A lot of our early stuff that we did was based on boxy stuff, right? Desks, end tables, even a lot of our bed. And we stayed low res, right? And we put bevels on stuff. But we started to see that when we got to our lamp and our clock radio, there were parts where we had more curvature on the surface, right? And so we wanted more kind of an organic, rounded shape. Now, can you get that just straight low res by adding edge loops in and manually shaping them? Yes. Is there anything wrong with that? No. Does it take a little bit longer than if you leverage Smooth Preview in a cool way? Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love Smooth Preview for certain models, because if you're smart about how you use it, it can be a shortcut, right? It can get you to a good, rounded, low resolution quicker and easier. Remember, my biggest rules, though, about using Smooth Preview are, if you're going to turn it on and use it, you better smooth your model at some point, right? Also, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, right? We don't want to have a million edge loops, right? We only want to use this really to get the primary quick forms and shapes in without getting too nuts with the details. Basically, the denser your mesh gets, the closer you get to final, the better your low-res looks in your low-res, the less you need the Smooth Preview. It's kind of at its most powerful in the early to intermediate modeling stages, when the difference between your low-res and high-res will be high, and you're blocking in kind of primary shape. So remember, that is 3, right? 3 will turn that on. 1 will turn that off, right? Now remember, I'm actually using the 1 and 3 that are above QWERTY, right? W-E-R, your letters, right? Not the number pad 1 and 3. But 1 is low res, so it turns off Smooth Preview. 3 is on, it turns on Smooth Preview. All right. In this case, I probably could use a few more edges this way, edge loops that way, so I'll go to multi-cut again. Now in this case, I don't need to snap, right? I can just hold down Control, and I can kind of put an edge loop in the back, and then maybe one in the front, right about there. Maybe one more in this, roughly in the center, and there we go. Now in this case, I do want to talk a little bit more about some shaping before I add some more edge loops, and then we'll stop this video and we'll kind of come back and do another video for the other cushion and the armrests. But remember, 1 is turns Smooth Preview off, 3 turns it on. Now in this case, remember, we have symmetry, and we've seen this a few times already too, haven't we, right? So our symmetry, we're going to use the default symmetry, right? So we're turning symmetry on here, and we'll pick world X, or in this case, I'm using world Z actually. See, I'm going to work so that this side will match this side. So in this case, if you look down here in the corner, that's the Z axis, right? So I'm going to use world Z actually, right? So we click on the little triangle here, world Z, and now you'll see that that actually works for symmetry, right? So I can select edges, I can select faces, and whatever happens, right, it'll change on the other side. So I could easily just come in here and, you know, maybe hold down right mouse button, edge, and I grab this edge and I can kind of move it up a little bit and back, just to kind of give a little bit of that curvature there. Maybe select that edge and move that down and forward. You said we could just kind of give it a little bit of that kind of rounded front there to that. All right? And you see I'm using these two so it moves along both axes at the same time. Now in this case, this has actually got a lot of the shape we want for that, but I probably could use this back end being a little sharper. So remember, if you double click on an edge loop, and really you can do this with just a single edge also, but remember, double left clicking on an edge selects an edge loop. With smooth preview, it's rounding the shape off, right? And you really notice that rounding at the corners. And I've talked about this before on previous projects also, but it's really rounding off at the corners, right? So what ends up happening is the smaller you make the corner, the smaller the smooth preview is. The larger you make the corner, the more rounded the smooth preview is, right? So if I move this edge loop this way, you see how that becomes rounder? But if I move it back, you see how it becomes kind of harder? That's because the smooth preview rounds at the corners. When you move this edge loop closer and closer to that corner gets smaller, and so the rounding becomes a little bit harder, kind of more like a bevel, right? So this is one of those cool little tricks about working with smooth preview, is that when you really understand how to use it well, you can still get some nice kind of sharp, hard edge surfaces that have bevels, but going into kind of softer areas. Now I really feel like I could do a little more shaping here, so we'll go to multi-cut. We'll hold down Control. Just put the edge loop in. There we go. And then what we could do is things like, we could probably take the center edge loop here, move it down a little bit. Maybe that one kind of over a little bit, just to kind of give it a little bit of roundness. See how it kind of curves in a little bit? So remember, double left click allows you to move an edge loop. Double left click, we move that one down. You see how we get a little bit of roundness there. And because symmetry's on, we're getting all the symmetry modeling. Now this could probably be a little bit softer here, so I can move this one back a little bit, right? And you see how once we start to understand those things, smooth preview is quite useful. Now in this case, it probably should be harder on the bottom, so I'll go to multi-cut. Hold down Control to kind of put an edge loop kind of down through here. And there we go. Now if we wanted to, we could of course W for move, right? I'm already in edge mode. Remember, hold down right mouse button, edge. Double left click, and I can just move this edge loop down a little bit, right? Just to harden that up. It probably should be a little softer here, so we can just select that edge and move it forward to soften it. And you see how you can kind of move a whole edge loop down, but then take some edges and kind of move them around to soften it. So there we go. And now we've got a good kind of base cushion for that starting point. At this point, I can go File, Save Scene As. And in this case, what I'll do is I'll just kind of copy this, right? Control C, Control V, and we'll get rid of the scenes part, right? And at the end of project 4, we'll underscore, then we can call this chair. And it's automatically going to save into project 4 scenes. There we go. And we've got a good starting point for this project. All right, so we'll kind of finish this up on the next